Kevin works in the oil and gas industry, and he's had a lifelong interest in the historical aviation and focusing on World War II. He's concentrated on the Japanese air raids on Western Australia and has written a book about it, and that's it over on the far side there, that's the cover. He's got some copies for sale today. People have already got in and bought quite a few. You may want to buy one of the remaining copies or give him your address and details. He might be able to get one to you, or alternatively have it here next meeting, and this will avoid the postage cost, which is pretty dear, $10. Kevin's done an enormous amount of research in this area. He had an ad in the West Australian to promote his book, and that's when I got onto him. And after a couple of phone calls and an email, we got our heads together and we prepared what you're about to see today. It's my judgment that you won't be able to hear everything about the Japanese air raids. There's just too much to say. Kevin has done so much research, he just can't cover it all. So we'll skim over most of it today, but by all means ask questions. So enjoy his delivery. Kevin, hit your feet.
Yes, thanks very much, Brian, and thanks very much for everybody being here today, and for inviting me to come along to speak on this remarkable subject, and what really has been, by and large, hitherto very little known topic concerning the immediate Japanese air raids on towns and locations in Western Australia. And it was because of that it's one of the inspirations that made me want to write about it, because a lot had been done about Darwin, particularly the first air raid on Darwin on the morning of February the 19th, 1942, and also the midget submarine attacks in Sydney Harbour, and other locations throughout the Northern Territory and Queensland. But very little, with the exception of one or two little pieces here and there and little articles here and there on maybe the first raid on Broome and one or two others, had ever been done about researching or written about the air raids here in our own state, here in Western Australia, of which there were actually 17. There were 17 attacks here in Western Australia, 16 by air and one little known submarine shelling. They all happened from a period of February 1942 to September 1943 on 8 towns in total, from Wyndham to the what was then the Drysdale, nowadays the Kangaroo Mission, Derby, Broome, Port Hedland, Onslow, and the area known as Exmouth Gulf, just prior to where the current township of Exmouth is today, and another small little fishing hamlet just halfway between Geraldton and Kalbarri, known as Port Gregory, is the air raids on Western Australia. And as I said, there were 16. Essentially, I researched and managed to find that there were actually 16 incursions that occurred, and these are mainly the locations, of course, from Wyndham, as I said, Kangaroo, and to Derby, Broome, down to Port Hedland, Onslow, and then Exmouth, and further down to Port Gregory. We see a situation of the advancement of the Japanese forces coming through after the attack on Pearl Harbor on the morning of Sunday, December the 7th, 1941, and their subsequent attacks into the Philippines. That the advancement of the Japanese armies coming down through what was then the Dutch East Indies was very swift and very quick, and in a very short space of time they established, overrunning a lot of the airstrips in the former Dutch East Indies. One in particular, Penfoe airstrip at Kopang, which is the airstrip still there today, of course, on the western side of Timor Island, and that subsequently gave them the distance to be able to extend their attacks to Northern Australia and Western Australia, and that's of course, with the famous Zero fighter in Western Australia. But starting originally is one of the most interesting of attacks to occur, and it's just coincidence actually. I was talking on the phone this morning to the daughter of Captain Jack Eggleston. Her name is June Jones, and I was talking to her on the phone this morning, as I say, and she was telling me that interestingly with this event, how, and I'll talk about it just briefly, how after the war, it was for their family. It was a very traumatising experience, and I can see why, because the Koh Lama was very interesting. It was the only ship to actually be sunk by the forces of the Japanese Imperial Navy Air Force in Western Australia, all with the exception of another little boat, a little pearling lugger that was destroyed on the first raid on Broome on March the 3rd, 1942. But the Koh Lama was on its way from Perth, making its way to Darwin, and where it was just off Cape Londonderry, it was attacked by a lone Japanese flying boat, a Mavis flying boat, and which didn't cause it. The bombs missed the boat. It caused great fountains of water to come up, and Captain Jack Eggleston didn't think too much of it at the time. He thought it would be okay, and proceeded to move on. But later on in the day, the Japanese returned with 3 flying boats led by a pilot by the name of Yamaguchi, off the top of my head, and he proceeded to bomb the 3 aircraft, bombed the Koh Lama, and caused it great damage, rendering the ship basically steerless, and it moved into an area called what is now known as Koh Lama Bay, Cape Ruliers, where through an amazing feat, after some deliberation, there was problems with the second officer, and there was problems with the crew, that he managed to refloat the Koh Lama and sail it back around into Wyndham Harbour. Ironically, on the morning of the first raid on Wyndham. So interesting, this accounts to being what is actually in fact the first actual raid within the confines of the immediate waters of Western Australia, with the bombing of the Koh Lama. As we can see, it had a special hull that was designed to withstand the significant tides in the kingdom. But moving on to what is actually the first air raid on West Australian soil during World War II. And this was on the morning of March the 3rd, 1942, a very significant date, I feel, in West Australia's wartime history, insofar as much that this date is really probably what we could call our own day of infamy, because there were 2 significant air raids and several ships that were sunk by Japanese submarines on this particular day. However, on the morning of this date, two flights of aircraft left Kopang in Western Timor. Their mission was the airstrips of Wyndham and Broome. The first flight arrived in Wyndham on that very morning, flying over the old township and the port, and they proceeded to bomb or rather strafe the airstrip at Wyndham. And this is a photograph of the old air radio hut at Wyndham, and we can see just at the top of the eaves there the bullet holes coming into it. And it was also interesting again that there was a de Havilland aircraft that flew in from Darwin that landed, and as of doing so, it was actually swooped upon by this flight of Japanese Zeros and destroyed that aircraft, although the passengers on board managed to get away. It was also a case of, you may be familiar with the name of Captain Jimmy Woods, who was in a Lockheed twin-engine aircraft, who landed just before the raid, refuelled, and took off again to make his way down to Broome. And he actually arrived in Broome just after the air raid there, but managed to depart Wyndham just before the commencement of the attack. The airfield was shot up, and it caused, there was a fuel dump which had only just been unloaded off the jetty a week before. That was destroyed, sending great plumes of black smoke in the air. They destroyed the hangar, where there was also additional fuel inside, and basically just shot up the airstrip. Nobody was killed, there was no casualties, but it is significantly the first air raid on Western Australia. And there we have a picture of, image of where the airstrip is located. New Park in Wyndham today, and the old jetty up here. And it's coincidentally that I could find no record that after Captain Jack Everson had managed to get his Kulama boat around into Wyndham, that it was actually bombed on that morning. Certainly the Japanese would have known about it. They would have flown over and seen it, tied up and listing at the Wyndham jetty. But there's no record of it actually having been attacked on that particular day. It was only with coincidence that it sunk that afternoon of where the actual Kulama to this day lies. There was subsequent salvaging efforts which never transpired, and it lies to this day just off Wyndham's jetty, in just about 40 metres off the jetty, where it leaves a strange swirling pattern on the water that's still there. So that was something interesting to come across. And of course we see the image that was taken of the Kulama listing at a side at Wyndham Jetty. It's one of the more famous photographs that get around of it. The second raid on Wyndham, and I'm going to try and go town by town, occurred on the 23rd of March 1942. In this case, it was a larger raid insofar as much that they had 3 Zero fighters as an escort, and involving 7 of the twin-engine Betty bombers. They bombed the airstrip. There's an old clipping there from the old Daily News, the now defunct Daily News. And interesting to say, one casualty there was a surgeon who had slight injury on his knee, and that's quite correct. When one of the 60-kilogram bombs exploded, a stone actually came out and hit his knee. They bombed the airstrip, and then they departed. They potholed the whole about 3,000 metre length airstrip, and thought that was enough. They saw the remains of what was left of the hangar from the previous raid back on the 3rd of March. There was a report that perhaps the meat works at Wyndham was attacked and destroyed. There's no evidence to support that actually occurred. It was just a direct attack on the airstrip at Wyndham, and that signified the end of the second raid and the only 2 raids on the town of Wyndham. Which interestingly leads it to back to this date again, the 3rd of March 1942. And what amounts to being the most significant air raid on Western Australia. And for all intents and purposes, after the first raid on Darwin, was the most devastating raid to occur in Australia. What was happening was, further north, the advancement of the Japanese, there was this exodus from a lot of the Dutch nationals and military personnel stationed in Java and the former Dutch East Indies, making their way south to the safety of Australia. Broome was used as a transfer point. So any aircraft that could be used and found, from DC-3s to the 3-engined overhead wing German-built Dutch Dornier seaplanes, Catalinas, were all used to transport this human cargo coming to Broome. The Japanese planes, there was 10 of them, 9 Zero fighters and 1 Babs reconnaissance aircraft that were involved into this attack. Now, on the morning of this, the Japanese weren't expecting all these flying boats to be in Roebuck Bay. There was a reconnaissance the night before, and the day before there was reported to be 2 reconnaissance, and they knew that there was aircraft on the airstrip at Broome, but none of these flying boats in the Roebuck Bay. So subsequently, on the morning upon arrival, they were so surprised to see all these flying boats, and some 16 of them. And of course, they had the air to themselves. There was no defence. And a terrible day, because a lot of these aircraft were laden with men, women and children, all evacuees from Dutch East Indies. And they had nowhere to go. They were shot up in the water, they were shot up in the planes, the fuselage. It was terrible conditions as it was, with the humidity, and the hygiene wasn't all that good. And they shot up the airstrip as well, of where the, as we can see, the flying boats here. That's the triple engine Dornier, superimposed image of one again up in the top right hand corner. And that's an image of how they are today. They are slowly eroding. There's not much left, of course, with low tide in Roebuck Bay. But it also leads to where on this road, where the first Japanese aircraft in World War II was shot down in Western Australia, and that was by a Flight Lieutenant Gus Winkle, who happened to be at the time servicing his gun out of a Hudson, and when the raid commenced, and he quickly finished his servicing, and he began to fire on the Japanese Zeros as they were swooping in over the airfield. And from about, he seems to think from about 30 or 40 feet away, you could see the whites of their eyes, he shot down a warrant officer, Osamu Kudo, of the Japanese Imperial Navy Air Force. And some reports to this day say that the aircraft blew up mid-air. Some reports say that it flew out back out over the confines of the Indian Ocean. But the wreckage of that Zero has never been found today. But I have on good authority that I ran into a diver who reckons he may have dived back in about the early 90s on what he seems to think was a Japanese Zero fighter plane further out in Roebuck Bay. And there was a obscure report some weeks after the morning of 3rd of March 1942 in early April that the body of the pilot was washed ashore in Broome and was buried. But anyway, moving on, it was a terrible raid. There was possibly up to 120 people that were killed on that day, and the official estimates put it up to 70. A lot of were interned after the war in Karrakatta Wargrave Cemetery. Some were returned back to the Dutch East Indies and some back to Holland itself. But a terrible tragedy, and it led itself to being in a situation where the war really did start to come home here to us here in Australia. Interesting story before sometimes I go off on tangents and I don't sort of necessarily espouse myself as being the best public speaker. I leave that to my writing to do. So an interesting story here that I came across is the fact that this was the only certified American aircraft that was shot down over the skies here in Western Australia, and it's this earlier model B-24 Liberator, and it had just flown in from Bling in what was then Dutch East Indies with a complement of United States Army Air Corps crew. Now there was at that stage certified 20 on board. When it departed Broome, as the raid was commencing, it's been said that there were actually up to 33 persons on board. Now, I haven't found any evidence to say that that's true or not, but nevertheless, it was actually shot down by the Zero fighter that was shot down by Gus Winkle, and as it was preparing to take off, and about 10 kilometres off Cable Beach is where it went down. the whole complement of the American servicemen that were aboard never survived. They were all killed, except for two. Two managed to swim back to shore, of where one actually survived, but the other gentleman, he passed away. And to this day, nobody knows what actually ever happened to his body. Some seem to think that he was transferred down to Perth, but there's no records to show where he ended up being in Perth Royal Hospital or anything. And that's a very interesting story. This is a close-up of view that was taken by the Babs reconnaissance aircraft. The photograph itself having been obtained after the war of the flying boats in Broome. It's caught on fire, people trapped inside, terrible event. Of course, Roebuck Bay is full of sharks. There are reports of people, women and children were being taken by the sharks. It's also prevalent with what they call the irukandji, like a stinging jellyfish. And I came across other reports where, in the subsequent rescue that was happening after the cessation of the attack about 10 o'clock in the morning, that with some of the rescuers, with the dead bodies floating in Roebuck Bay and getting washed ashore, that there were ones going around with your big snippers, your big tin snips, and they were actually cutting off the fingers of the dead victims floating in the water to get to their wedding rings and watches and bracelets like that they were carrying with them when they were evacuating from the Dutch East Indies. Extraordinary things. Which leads to, again, on the same date, 3rd of March 1942, where, interesting story, this one's been well documented. There was one book put out in the 1970s by a gentleman by the name of Tyler, who wrote on about the case of the missing Dutch diamonds. And this was where a certain Captain Smirnoff had a small complement of passengers and Dutch Air Force crew on board this DC-3, taking off from a place called Cilacap, or Chilajap, is the right pronunciation, in southern Java. Now, just before the flight commenced, he was given this package, this ordinary looking brown paper bag package, and he wasn't too sure what was in it, but he was told that somebody to be there to collect it for him upon his arrival, which the ultimate destination was Melbourne, and somebody was there to collect it. Anyway, interestingly, this aircraft was actually intercepted by the returning flight of Japanese Zeros back to their forwarding base in Kupang, and just north of Broome, there's a place called Carnot Bay, and anyway, 3 Zeros veered off from the main flight, heading back, intercepted the DC-3, flown by Captain Ivan Smirnoff, a Russian-born Dutch pilot, and shot it up, shot him down. The people on board were wounded, including Smirnoff himself. He had terrible wounds in his thighs and in his side of his body, but he still managed to successfully ditch the plane on the beach at Carnot Bay. The Japanese Zero still swooped over his DC-3 as he crash landed his DC-3 onto the beach, and they got out of the plane and ran to the sand dunes for cover. Anyway, sometime afterwards, after the Zeros had gone, they wanted to go back to the aircraft to retrieve some personal belongings, and one of them was this special package which Smirnoff had put into his cockpit, just down by his seat. And anyway, one of the young chaps who was handling bringing this personal stuff out of the aircraft picked up this package, and unbeknown to him, he didn't know what it was, but it fell open, and it was all these diamonds, and they all went into the surf, and that's his explanation of it. So I won't go on too much, but what happened afterwards? There was a Crown case. There was the story of the Palmer, the beachcomber. He came around and saw the plane there. He reckons he found him and discovered it. They reckon afterwards, there was local Aboriginal people walking around with all these diamonds and other local yokels around Broome, and where they ended up. There's another image of the aircraft. I think that's Palmer in the middle there somewhere, I think, who was, reckons he had all these diamonds and found it. Either way, there's Captain Smirnoff, who actually by 1947 had clocked up something like 27,000 hours of flying time, which at the time was a world record, I think. So whatever happened to the diamonds at Carnot Bay, no one knows to this day. And gee, you know, a lot of people have gone looking for them, but my personal belief, that's exactly what happened. They all got washed in the surf and never to be seen again. Moving on. A little known raid, and it was the hardest raid to research, mainly because, like a lot of them, not a lot of records survived. The Defence Studies Institute in Japan, they have some records. I personally couldn't go to Japan because of budget restraints, but by the same token, whilst their files from World War II are catalogued, they haven't been translated. And so not a lot of information survives on some of the raids, and this was a particularly hard one because not a lot was recorded about it. But it did occur on the morning of March 20th, 1942, 2 Japanese Zero fighters. About 8 o'clock in the morning, zoomed over a Derby airstrip, spent about 10-15 minutes strafing, shooting up the airstrip. There was a small contingent of the Volunteer Defence Corps based there. They shot back with their 303 rifles. There was no reports of any damage or any casualties, and that was about it. That was the raid at Derby. Small little raid, not mainly really significant, but it did actually occur. And in remembrance of that, several years ago, the Youth Council in Derby erected a memorial at Derby Airfield. So nevertheless, it goes on record as being actually an area that was attacked. And there's a image showing Derby, aerial image showing Derby from the World War II period. Of course, it's the jetty area there. The airstrip is back over here somewhere. That's its township there. The second raid on Broome is interesting, and if you look at back further, they coincide with the 2 dates. And the second raid on Broome was similar to the second raid on Wyndham, insofar as much that it involved the twin-engine Betty bombers. And it's been surmised that it was the escort fighters of these 7 Betty bombers involved on the second raid on Broome that veered off to inspect the facilities at Derby. So the flight of, there were 4 escorts, 0 escorts, 7 Betty bombers. Their flight forwarded on from out of Kupang, were on their way to Broome. 2 were ordered to veer off, 2 fighter escorts, that is, the Zeros were veered off to inspect the facilities at Derby. And from my research, that's how the raid in Derby came about. Nevertheless, Broom Airfield. By this stage, the township of Broome was virtually deserted. Most of the civilian population had been evacuated. The remains of the aircraft that were destroyed on Broome Airstrip were still evident, were still there. There was only the report of 1 aircraft there, and that was the Stinson Reliant, which I have a photograph here, that was destroyed on this second raid. The airfield was, which we have a wonderful drawing here of them coming in. You can see that Stinson Reliant was parked here, and this is the plan of, it was taken by Charles Snook, I believe, yes, who drew this up afterwards, who was there at the time, because he was the pilot for the commanding officer of the Broome area at the time. There was only 1 death recorded, and that was a young 36-year-old Malay worker who was employed at the airstrip, and he was killed when a bomb landed very close by him and took him out. The force of the Japanese raids, it pitted the whole airstrip, left numerous craters everywhere before they proceeded to head back north, back to Timor, back to Kupang. There was, in both of these raids, there was no reports that they actually attacked or bombed the town, and the same goes for most of the air raids. The towns were not actually directly bombed themselves. It was mainly the military facilities that were targeted. Interestingly enough, and this only come up just recently, interred in Karrakatta War grave Cemetery. I was out there just only a few weeks ago and taking some photographs of on another subject, which I'm leading for another book, when I thought I'd just pop in and have a look at the Dutch cemetery in there again. And I was in there and I was walking around and I noticed this is the gentleman that was killed, the grave of the gentleman who was killed on the second raid on Broome. And looking at it, I was interested to see that his date was died 3rd of March 1942, whereas the actual date of the raid was the 20th of March 1942. So with the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, I just noticed that there's a slight, what appears to be a slight error in that. It's very, very interesting. 4 raids in Broome on all up. The other 2 that occurred were done mainly by the long-range 4-engine flying boats. The 27th of August 1942, it was a reconnaissance patrol, probably returning back after reconnaissance on the northwest coast back to Kupang and Timor, left a series of about a dozen bombs on the foreshore, and it mirrored very much on the 4th raid, again on Broome, almost a year later, on the 16th of August 1943, again at the shores of Roebuck Bay, were bombed by a lone Japanese, either Mavis or Emily, not too sure, 4-engine long-distance flying boat. No casualties and no no damage was done out of these 2 raids. Port Hedland. This is probably outside of Broome, particularly, and Wyndham, one of the most damaging raids to actually occur. And there's a lot of people that don't know about this raid in Port Hedland. A lot of people in today's world, fly in, fly out with a massive mining development in the northwest, are still oblivious to that Port Hedland underwent a total of 3 raids, the most significant occurring on July the 30th, 1942. We can see an image here of the photographer capturing his own image of one of the craters that was left by the attacking force. Again, Betty bombers. It was 8, I think, off the top of my head. Betty bombers. They had no fighter escort, evidently. Bombed the airstrip early in the morning. There was a series of rows of tents for the 29th Garrison Battalion that were there to provide defence for the airstrip. The raid itself lasted about 20 minutes. Massive craters left pitting the whole, both of the runways. And of course, you know, this is not like the Port Hedland, the modern facilities they have there now. 1 man was killed, and an interesting story that how this came about. So I met his surviving family, who still reside here in Perth. His sister and his older brother, a former returned serviceman himself, and it was a young 19-year-old Private John Adams who came from Millenden in just out here, just by the hills, and he was killed as the raid commenced when what they're known as a daisy cutter landed very close by to his tent. He was just getting up out of bed. He had 2 other gentlemen that were in the same, sharing his same tent, and he dived for cover under his bunk when a large piece of shrapnel entered the tent, and it took off the back of his head and killed him instantly. And later it was surmised that if he'd only moved probably maybe half a foot that way, the piece of shrapnel would have missed him, but it caught him, unfortunately. And he goes on to record as being the only serviceman who was born in Western Australia, was recruited in Western Australia, served in Western Australia, and was killed as a direct result of enemy action here in Western Australia. And he was only 19. He is now interned in the well-kept, equally well-kept Geraldton War Grave Cemetery, of which there are 2 here in WA, Karrakatta, and another one in Geraldton. So a very interesting story. 3 raids in Hedland, and again the other one was on the 17th of August 1942, and the 3rd being on the 16th. These 2 again were carried out by long-range 4-engined Mavis or Emily flying boats, Japanese flying boats, and where there was a series of bombings done on the foreshore and around by the harbour, near to where the present harbour facilities are. No damage and no further deaths on these two raids. Onslow was thought to have been the lowest or the most southerly air raid to ever occur in Australia. That's actually quite incorrect. It's actually the furthest south air raid to occur in all of Australia, and Western Australia for that matter, where an existing township was already present. And this occurred on, as it says, on the 15th of September 1943. Two high altitude flying aircraft. They were never identified as to what they were. They could have been submarine launched Glen float planes. They might have been the long range 4-engine flying boats. Maybe the long range Betty bombers, who it's never been confirmed what aircraft they were, but they're definitely belligerent Japanese. They circled the town, and where the vicinity of where the old airstrip now lies, they let us off a series of about 12 bombs. This occurring about 11 o'clock at night, and this, we have an image there of that was coming out of a private collection actually of a gentleman in the subsequent couple of days sitting on the edge of one of the craters that was starting to fill with water because they actually landed on a marsh. So the craters that were left started to fill up with water, and that was occurring at Onslow. And I'll come back to that date. You see that date there, the 15th of September 1943. I'll come back to that one. What is the most southerly air attacks in Australia occurring at Exmouth Gulf? At this stage, the Americans, the United States Navy, had established a forward submarine tendering base there known as Potshot, and the Australian Army were to provide the defence of this Potshot, what they call the Potshot base. With the submarine tendering ship there, the Peleus, and other US submarines being stationed there, the Japanese really wanted to penetrate the defences there. But the Australian Army did actually provide very good defence, lots of anti-aircraft gun stations, and over the course of 3 nights, 20th of May 1943, the 21st and the 22nd, they attempted to penetrate the defences there at Exmouth Gulf. They did indeed drop several bombs which seemed to have landed harmlessly out into the waters of Exmouth Gulf. Some landed close onto the shoreline. There were no deaths, but there were a couple of reports of minor injuries occurring. Here we see the image taken at the time. This is circa 1943 of the main loading jetty facility there at Exmouth Gulf, and that's what it looks like today, which is a significant difference. But there is, I think it's this bit here, there on the close-up, walking out to it, it's actually the remains of an old 44-gallon drum. So, interestingly, just to quickly add into that, it was also where one of our famous air aces, Keith Bluey Truscott, was killed. And this is a photograph of Bluey leading out. He was made honorary captain of the day of Melbourne in the what was then the VFL, nowadays the AFL. And after serving over in Europe, and just before he was to go to New Guinea, before Milne Bay, he was asked if he could come back and play another game of football, of which he had been a very good footballer in the 1930s. He was in Melbourne's premiership sides in 1939 and 1940. And he was asked to be made honorary captain for the day. And this is a photo of him leading his team out on the side for his last game. Whereby, unfortunately, he was killed later on, sometime down the track, and in Exmouth Gulf. And he's now interred in Karrakatta War Graves Cemetery. Exmouth Gulf also was the point where the crate departed on in order to go and undergo its first successful mission of Operation Jaywick in Singapore Harbour. So Exmouth is a very significant Australian military site. talking about the 21st and the 22nd of May, the Japanese, again, in 3 nights consecutively, tried to penetrate the defences there. The last known air incursion by the Japanese to take place on Exmouth was the 16th of September 1943. Sorry. If we go back to looking at Onslow, this is the 15th. It's been surmised that the aircraft that bombed, the 2 aircraft that bombed Onslow, were on their way to Exmouth. They were scared off by the defences there, came back, released jettisoned their bombs on Onslow before proceeding back to the occupied Dutch East Indies. That's where the connection there comes into it. Lastly, the last attack on Western Australia, not the last attack in date, but and the only known submarine shelling to occur on the west coast came on the night of the 28th of January 1943. It was with the Japanese submarine, the I-165. It had been ordered from its base from Surabaya in what is now Indonesia to initially draw the Allies' attention away from the happenings going over in Guadalcanal. Its original mission was to shell and bomb the port facilities of Geraldton. However, the commander of the submarine, when he surfaced about 7 kilometres offshore, about 10 o'clock at night, on the 28th of January 1943, he noticed low-flying aircraft with their lights on, circling Geraldton. And they were in Avro Ansons, and they were out conducting nighttime manoeuvres. That was enough to scare him off. So he proceeded to submerge, heading back north, and came across a little place called Port Gregory. Now, the Japanese were aware that of all these places having existed. Port Gregory, there was nothing there at the time, some old fishing shacks, but there was a jetty, and they were aware of the jetty existing. And he decided to surface there, about 7 kilometres offshore again, and shell the immediate Port Gregory area. Let off about 10 shells that all flew over to where the immediate township now lies and landed in a series of marshland just behind the town, which is today is an image of it there today. The shoreline is about 400 metres that way, just over where those power poles are. And this is an image of the general area where the shells landed. It was covered up for many years. Not a lot was ever spoken about or talked about it or made official record of it until about the early 1980s, when the Australian government, the Australian Defence Force, actually acknowledged that a Japanese submarine, the I-165, actually did shell and delivered a series of shells on or near this little place called Port Gregory. That's on top of the Sydney midget submarine attacks and the other submarine attack at Newcastle on the east coast. Again, looking at a submarine of the Cat-Eye class, large type Japanese submarine that was similar to the I-165 that shelled Port Gregory, and an image of what the Japanese Imperial Japanese Navy Air Force actually mastered, and that was to launch aircraft from submarines, which did a lot for their reconnaissance all the way around Western Australia, and Australia for that matter, the whole country, where the reconnaissance was spotted everywhere, from Norseman to Kalgoorlie to other areas around the east coast. The last raid on Western Australia occurred at the Drysdale Mission and the adjacent airstrip on the 27th of September 1943. It was in fact the largest air raid insofar as 22 of the twin-engine Lily Light bombers took place. They had some say five Japanese Zero fighter escorts. However, from the air, the mission looked like a military facility. Big large red letters had been painted on top of the mission church saying mission. On this morning, it was both the airstrip and the mission that were targeted and bombed. and we see an image here of the convent after the attack, totally gutted and burnt out. 6 people were killed at Kangaroo, and this is on top of the fatality at Port Hedland and the fatalities at Broome. Not a lot of people know that Kangaroo had their own casualty list. It was one of the brothers at the mission and 5 Aboriginal people at the mission who were killed. Again, another terrible day because there were upwards to several hundred people who were there at that mission, and the attack was quite unexpected. It was also the most inland raid in Western Australia. Drysdale Mission lying some 30 kilometres in from the coastline, and there was one minor injury occurring to a gentleman, young RAAF corporal. He was at the airstrip. His name was Tom Johnson. He still lives down in Esperance, actually. He's still alive. And a 20 kilogram oil bomb landed close by him, and it proceeded to, the flames proceeded to burn the back of his shirt, and he jumped into a very small slick trench, and with another fella, and he managed to slap him and put it all out. And he did suffer some burns on the back of his shoulder and on his back, which he, according to Tommy, reckons the medical officer the next day didn't think it was, reckon it was too important, but he reckons he felt it at the time. He got burnt by this oil bomb. So, concluding that, in a nutshell, there's a lot more involved. There was a lot more that occurred and went on, and particularly on and off the shorelines, with Japanese submarines surfacing in coves and bays around Western Australia, and other reconnaissance flights that were noted all over the whole state. But essentially, they were the air raids. They were the areas and towns that were targeted, actually going on record as being strafed and bombed. Very interesting, very little known part of WA. As I said, a lot of people today associate these areas as favourite holidaying or fishing areas, not knowing that at one stage that these areas are at the front line of immediate Japanese attack. So it's been a wonderful journey to research this, and been fantastic to document it, and I thought I knew a little bit about it before until I started doing it, and by geez have I learned a lot along the way over the last 3 or 4 years. So I'm very pleased to be here today to be able to share some of that with you, and I'd like to thank you very much for having me. Thank you.